After completing your market study, you'll probably notice that sublease space is usually a lot cheaper than leasing directly from the landlord, which is often referred to as direct space. So why is that the case? There are several factors. First and foremost, a prospective subtenant has a limited ability to negotiate because many of the terms will be governed by your existing lease, which is called the master lease. For example, the lease term. If you're offering space for sublease, then you probably won't be able to offer a term longer than what's in your master lease. Subtenant will have to accept your current lease expiration date, or possibly something shorter if you choose to accept that. The tenant improvement allowance is significantly reduced in a sublease. The reason being that you, the sublessor, don't want to spend money on a space that you don't own. Furthermore, the landlord won't spend money on a sublease because they're probably getting no additional rent. There are some cases in which the landlord makes some additional rent if the sublease rent is higher than the direct rent, but this is not very common. The subtenant will expect a discounted rental rate because in most cases, they're taking the space as is. A few other examples of terms that are difficult to alter for a sublease are the signage rights, the parking spaces, holdover rent, and the subordination non-disturbance attornment clause. These are things that you negotiated with the landlord when you signed your master lease, and the landlord is unlikely to change any of them for your subtenant. In addition to having a reduced ability to negotiate some terms, there are other terms that often can't be passed to the subtenant. For example, renewal rights and expansion rights. These can be valuable for any company that anticipates growth. It's common for leases to prevent you from passing those rights to your subtenant. Sometimes it's possible to exercise that right on behalf of your subtenant, in effect extending your master lease so that you can give your subtenant a longer term, but that's rarely something you'll want to do because you'll probably be losing money on the sublease rent, so that's not a situation you'll want to extend. The subtenant will probably have no direct relationship with the landlord. You, in effect, are their landlord. This may seem like a small point, but many tenants like to develop a relationship with their landlord so they can improve the service they receive, like repairs and maintenance, and perhaps get preferential treatment on a future negotiation. Finally, a subtenant takes the risk of your default. If you, the sublessor, default on your lease, then the subtenant will have two choices. They can take over your lease and comply with the terms of that contract, or they can risk being kicked out of the building, because the landlord is not obligated to honor the sublease contract. It's unlikely the subtenant will choose to take over your lease because it will probably mean a significant rent increase, particularly if they're only leasing a portion of your space, because in that case they would have to start paying for the entire space, which could mean a tremendous rent increase. So the subtenant will be in a risky position. Certainly they can try negotiating something with the landlord, but it's possible they'll be kicked out of the building. If your company has strong credit, then that's a selling point to a prospective subtenant because it minimizes this type of risk since it's unlikely that you'll default on your lease. In summary, unless you're in a very hot leasing market, be prepared to sublease your space for significantly less than what you're paying the landlord. At this point in the process, you've created a project timeline, reviewed your lease thoroughly, determined what space you want to sublease, and studied the market to understand pricing. The next step, before you start marketing the space, is to contact your landlord. This is generally not required by our lease, but it's a good idea. You can either do it yourself or have your broker do it on your behalf. Let the landlord know that you're planning to sublease your space. They will appreciate getting a heads up, and it may buy you some goodwill when you need something from them later in the process. Try to gauge their interest level in helping you. One way to do this is to discuss the idea of having them offer an extended term to a subtenant, or possibly terminating your lease and doing a direct deal with a subtenant. Landlords come in all shapes and sizes, and often have different attitudes about assisting their tenants with a sublease. Hopefully you'll have a good one, but in either case, you'll want to know what you're dealing with. Next, make a termination proposal. This is also known as a lease buyout. Perform an analysis showing your expected income from a sublease, then compare that to your remaining lease obligations so that you can estimate the total loss you'll have to incur. I recommend having your broker do this analysis for you. Use your expected loss as a guide for making a buyout offer to the landlord. Let's leave this slide for a minute so I can show you an example. The following is a simplified example. Let's pretend that your company has leased office space with the following terms. You signed a 5-year lease on 40,000 square feet. You're paying $60 per square foot per year with no other expenses. You're 2.5 years into the lease and you're moving out because you need a bigger space. Your broker estimates it will take 6 months to sublease it and you'll receive $45 per square foot per year. So let's estimate how much of a loss you're going to take. This is a very simplified version of an analysis. They get much more complex in the real world, but I don't think seeing the full version would help you right now. At this point, I just want to show you the thought process. So let's walk through this. The column on the far left has the lease period. You can see the first entry is the second half of year 3 because we're 2.5 years into a 5-year lease. Below that, we have years 4 and 5. The column to the right shows your rent obligation. These numbers are in parentheses because they are cash outflows. It starts with half of year 3 and then all of years 4 and 5 for a total of $6 million. The column to the right shows your estimated income from a sublease. There is nothing in the second half of year 3 because your broker told you it will take 6 months to find a subtenant. Years 4 and 5 show sublease revenue of $45 per square foot per year, which is a total of $3.6 million. So your expected loss is $2.4 million. Knowing this, what would you pay the landlord to terminate your lease right now? You might think $2.4 million is too much because, given the time value of money, it's more expensive to pay a lump sum today compared to spreading that cost over several years. But you should be willing to take more of a loss on a buyout than a sublease because a buyout gets the lease obligation off your books immediately and takes considerably less time to execute. You also avoid the risk of getting the space back in the event your subtenant defaults. I can't tell you what to offer because there are many other factors you'll need to consider that will be specific to your situation. But this type of analysis gives you a starting place. Then, with the help of your broker and your attorney, you can decide how motivated you are to complete a buyout, which will help you decide how aggressive you want to be with your proposal. A quick side note, you can also use this analysis if you have a termination right because you can compare your fee to exercise that right to the expected loss from a sublease. For example, in this scenario, if you had a termination right that cost $2 million, then you would probably exercise it. Even though writing a check for $2 million isn't very fun, it's less risky and probably less expensive than pursuing a sublease. After you've made your proposal and the landlord has responded, you can then decide if you want to continue negotiating or proceed with finding a subtenant. This decision should not solely be based on the financial analysis. Consider the time, effort, and risk in pursuing a sublease. Be aware that even if you focus on doing a sublease, this probably won't be the last time you negotiate with your landlord because if you find a subtenant, you're going to try again. And when that happens, you'll be in a stronger negotiating position so you can expect the termination costs to go down.